The crash landing, the transport shuttle Meridian screamed through the atmosphere of Zarian 7 like a dying star. Its hull glowing cherry red from friction as warning alarms shrieked in the cockpit. Sarah Chun gripped the controls with white knuckles. Her engineering training, the only thing keeping her alive as the ship bucked and rolled through the violent storm clouds surrounding the mining planet. Come on, you piece of junk, she muttered through gritted teeth, fighting to keep the nose up as the starboard engine sputtered and died. The shuttle had been old when she'd inherited from her mentor, Dr. Marcus Webb, and 3 years of hauling. Supplies between mining outposts hadn't improved its condition. But it was hers, and she'd be damned if she was going to let it kill her on what should have been a routine supply run. The ground rushed up to meet her faster than she'd like. Sarah pulled back on the controls, using every trick Webb had taught her about emergency landings. The shuttle hit the crystalline surface of Zarian 7 with a bone-jarring impact that sent sparks flying from every console. Metal screamed against stone as the ship skidded across the alien landscape, carving a deep furrow through the glowing mineral deposits that made this world so valuable to the mining corporation's dot when the shuttle finally came to rest against. A towering crystal formation? Sarah sat in the sudden silence, her ears ringing and her heart hammering against her ribs. She was alive. Somehow, impossibly. She was alive. She ran through the emergency checklist Webb had drilled into her head, checking for hull breaches, radiation leaks, and structural damage. The ship was battered, but intact, though the engine core was completely fried. She wouldn't be flying anywhere without major repairs, and she didn't have the parts or equipment for that kind of work on a hostile world, like this. Sarah grabbed her emergency pack and sealed her environmental suit before stepping out into the alien landscape. Zarian 7 was beautiful in its own terrible way. Massive crystal formations jutted from the ground like frozen lightning, some as tall as skyscrapers, all of them humming with an energy that made her skin tingle even through the suit's protection. The sky was a deep purple shot through with veins of gold, and twin suns cast everything in otherworldly light that made the crystals sparkle like diamonds, but beauty didn't make the world any less dangerous. The atmosphere was toxic to humans, the wildlife was aggressive, and the electromagnetic storms that regularly swept across the surface could fry electronics and cook anyone caught in the open. Sarah had perhaps 6 hours of air in her suit, maybe 8 if she was careful. Not long enough to wait for rescue, assuming anyone even knew she was missing. She was checking her emergency beacon when she heard it, a low, pained howl that seemed to echo from the crystal formations around her. It sounded almost like a wolf, but deeper, more resonant. And underneath the animal cry, she could swear she heard something else. Something that sounded almost like words, following the sound. Sarah made her way through a maze of crystal spires toward what looked like the remains of another crashed ship. This one was sleeker than her shuttle, built from materials she didn't recognize, but it had clearly been down much longer. Parts of the hull were partially dissolved by the acidic rains that periodically swept across Zarian 7, and strange crystalline growths had begun to claim sections of the vessel. The howling came again, closer now, and Sarah realized it was coming from inside the alien ship. She found an opening that had been torn in the side of the hull, probably by whatever impact had brought the vessel down. The interior was dark and filled with a low, thrumming energy that made her teeth ache. Her suit's lights cut through the darkness as she picked her way through the wreckage, following the sound of distressed calls deeper into the ship. What she found in what must have been the cargo hold made her stop in her tracks. Suspended in the center of the room was a containment field, crackling with blue-white energy. And trapped inside that field was the source of the howling, a creature, unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. It stood upright like a human, but was easily 7 feet tall and covered in thick, silver-gray fur. Its face was elongated, almost wolf-like, with intelligent yellow eyes that fixed on her the moment she entered the room. When it saw her, it spoke, and the words were clearly recognizable despite the alien accent. Help, please, Sarah's mind reeled. an alien that could speak English. That was impossible. First contact protocols were clear. Humanity had encountered dozens of alien species in their expansion across the galaxy. But none had ever demonstrated the ability to learn human languages, let alone speak them so clearly. The creature, male, she thought, based on the build and voice, was clearly injured. She could see burns along his arms and chest where the containment field was touching his fur, and he moved with obvious pain. Whatever had happened to his ship, he'd been trapped in this energy prison for what must have been days or weeks. "Who are you?" Sarah asked, her voice distorted by her suit's communication system. "I am Kale of the Lycanthie," the alien replied, his words careful and precise. "I was exploring when my ship was damaged by the storms, the containment field activated during the crash." "I cannot escape Lycanthie." Sarah had never heard of them, but that wasn't surprising. The galaxy was vast, and humanity had barely scratched the surface of the civilizations that called it home. What mattered was that this Kale was clearly intelligent, could communicate, and was in desperate need of help. Sarah studied the containment field, her engineering mind automatically analyzing the energy patterns and looking for weaknesses. It was sophisticated technology, but it followed principles she understood. The field was powered by the ship's emergency systems, which were drawing energy from the same crystalline formations that covered the planet's surface. If she could disrupt the power flow, "I'm going to try to get you out," she told Gale. "But I need you to stay as still as possible. This field is designed to contain energy beings, not biological matter. If I'm right, I can overload it from the outside." Kale nodded, his yellow eyes never leaving her face. There was something in his gaze that made Sarah's heart skip a beat. Not fear or desperation, but something else. Something that reminded her of the way her cat back home looked at her when she came home from a long assignment. Warmth, affection. Even she shook off the strange thought and got to work. Her emergency pack contained basic tools and a portable power unit designed for emergency repairs. If she could jury-rig a feedback loop into the containment system's power matrix, she might be able to cause a cascade failure that would shut down the field without hurting Kale. Working in the cramped alien ship was difficult, made worse by the constant thrumming energy that seemed to vibrate through her bones. But Sarah had always been good with her hands, and Dr. Webb had taught her to think creatively when faced with unfamiliar technology. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, she had her improvised device ready. "This might hurt," she warned Kale as she prepared to activate the feedback loop. "The field collapse could cause a surge." "I trust you," he replied simply, and something in his voice made her pause. She activated her device, and immediately the containment field began to fluctuate. The blue-white energy crackled and sparked, and Kale gritted his teeth as the field's grip on him intensified momentarily before beginning to fail. Sarah watched the power levels spike and fall on her scanner, holding her breath as the system fought against her sabotage. Then, with a sound like breaking glass, the containment field collapsed. Kale stumbled forward, free at last, but weakened by his long imprisonment. Sarah moved to catch him before he could fall, and that's when it happened. As soon as her gloved hands touched his fur-covered arms, Kale's head snapped around and his teeth closed gently but firmly on her wrist. Right through the environmental suit's material, Sarah yelped in surprise and jerked her arm back, staring at the alien in shock. "Did you just bite me?" Kale released her immediately, his yellow eyes wide with what looked like embarrassment. Yes, I am sorry. It is ... instinct." "Instinct?" Sarah's voice was high with disbelief. "What kind of instinct involves biting someone who just rescued you?" The alien's ears flattened against his head, and if Sarah didn't know better, she would have said he was blushing under all that fur. "Among my people, a bite is ... it shows interest. Attraction. When you touched me, when I smelled your scent, even through your protective covering. I thought you were, how do you say hot?" Sarah stared at him for a long moment, processing what he'd just said. Then, despite everything, the crash, the hostile planet, the complete insanity of the situation, she started to laugh. Not the hysterical laughter of someone losing their grip on reality, but genuine amusement at the cosmic joke of it all. You bit me because you thought I was attractive, she managed between giggles. Kale looked even more embarrassed, if that was possible. It is not funny. Among the Lycanthi, such a bite is a serious declaration of intent. I have how would you put it, marked you as desirable. That sobered Sarah up quickly. She looked down at her wrist where she could see the puncture marks in her suit's material. Thankfully, the suit's self-sealing systems had already closed the holes. But she could feel a warm wetness against her skin that told her his teeth had broken. Through. Look, Kale, she said, trying to be diplomatic. I appreciate the compliment, I guess. But where I come from, biting someone is generally considered assault, not flirting. The alien's ears perked up slightly. Your customs are different? Very different. Sarah looked around the damaged ship, suddenly aware of how precarious their situation was. But right now, we have bigger problems than cross-species dating etiquette. My ship is down, your ship is wrecked, and this planet is going to kill us both if we don't work together. Kale nodded, his expression growing serious. You are right. Zarian 7 is not safe, especially during the storm season. We must find shelter and a way to signal for rescue. Storm season? Sarah didn't like the sound of that. The electromagnetic storms will intensify over the next few days. Worse than what brought down your ship, and may attract the crystal wolves. Crystal. Wolves? Before Kale could answer, a howl echoed across the landscape outside. Not the pained call for help they'd heard earlier, but something hungry and predatory. It was answered by another howl, then another, until the air was filled with the sound of a pack calling to each other. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the alien atmosphere. How many are there? Kale's ears were flat against his head again, but this time it was fear, not embarrassment. Too many. We must leave this place now. The scent of blood will draw them here soon. Sarah looked down at her punctured suit, understanding flooding through her. My blood, from where you bit me. I am sorry, Kale said, as she could hear genuine regret in his voice. I did not think ... It's done, Sarah said, forcing herself to focus on survival rather than blame. How far away are these wolves? As if in answer to her question, a shape moved past the opening in the ship's hull, something large and low-slung, with fur that sparkled like living crystal. Yellow eyes reflected her suit's lights for a moment before disappearing back into the purple twilight. Close, Kale whispered. Very close. Sarah shouldered her pack and checked her suit's power levels. Still 5 hours of air, but that wouldn't matter if they became something's dinner. Do you know this area? Is there anywhere we can take shelter? Kale nodded, moving toward the opening in the hull with surprising grace despite his injuries. There are caves in the crystal formations to the north. The wolves do not like the resonance frequencies, but we must move quickly and quietly. As they slipped out of the wrecked ship, Sarah caught sight of more shapes moving in the crystal. Maze around them. The pack was gathering, drawn by the scent of her blood and the promise of an easy meal. But they weren't rushing in for the kill. They were patient, intelligent, working together to surround their prey. How smart are these things? She whispered to Kale as they picked their way through the crystalline landscape. Smart enough to use pack tactics, he replied quietly. Smart enough to set traps, and hungry enough to hunt anything that bleeds. A shadow moved to their left, then another to their right. Sarah could feel eyes watching them from every direction, yellow and predatory and patient. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she realized they weren't just being hunted. They were being herded. Kale, she said, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. I think we have a problem. The alien's head turned slightly, his enhanced senses picking up things she couldn't detect. They are trying to drive us toward the acid pools. Away from the caves. Sarah's engineering mind started working despite her fear. If the wolves were intelligent enough to use the terrain against them, they would need to be smarter. Can you run? Yes. Can you? She looked at the crystal formations around them, mapping possible routes in her head. The caves Kale had mentioned were north, but the pack was systematically cutting off that direction. Unless. Follow me, she said, suddenly changing direction toward what looked like a dead-end canyon. And trust me. Kale hesitated for only a moment before following her. Lead. Behind them, the crystal wolves began to howl in earnest, realizing their prey was no longer cooperating with the hunt. The canyon walls rose high on either side, and Sarah could see the wolves moving along the ridges above them, keeping pace. But she had spotted something they had missed, a narrow crevice in the rock face that led up and over the ridge. It would be a difficult climb, especially for someone in an environmental suit, but it was their only chance. There, she pointed, to the crevice. We go up. Kale looked at the narrow opening, then at her suit. You cannot fit through there with your equipment. Watch me, Sarah said grimly, and began to shed non-essential gear from her pack. Food, extra tools, even her backup air supply, everything went except the absolute minimum she needed to survive. It was a gamble, but staying down here with the pack was certain death. The first wolf rounded the corner of the canyon, just as Sarah squeezed into the crevice. It was even more terrifying up close than she had imagined, easily the size of a horse, with fur that looked like living diamond and teeth, like crystal daggers. It saw her and let out a roar that seemed to vibrate through the stone itself. Climb, Kale shouted, pushing her up ahead of him as more wolves poured into the canyon, below. Sarah had never been so grateful for all those hours. Dr. Webb had made her spend maintaining the mining equipment in zero-G. Her muscles remembered how to move efficiently in difficult conditions, and her environmental suit was designed for industrial work, not fashion. It was tough enough to handle the rough stone without tearing. Kale climbed behind her with fluid grace. But she could see that his injuries were slowing him down. The crystal wolves below were trying to follow, their claws scraping against stone as they searched for purchase on the smooth walls. They reached the top of the ridge, just as the first fall found a way to start climbing. Sarah looked back too. See the creature's crystalline claws leaving deep gouges in the rock face as it hauled itself upward with terrifying determination. The caves, Kale gasped, pointing toward a cluster of openings in the rock formations ahead. We can make it. But Sarah could see more wolves moving to intercept them, and she realized that even if they reached the caves, they would be trapped there. Unless the pack gave up, they would just be delaying the inevitable. That's when she noticed something about the crystal formations around them. They were all connected, part of a vast network that stretched across the entire landscape. And they were humming with energy, the same energy that had powered the containment field on Kale's ship. Kale, she said urgently, you said the wolves don't like the resonance frequencies. What happens if we overload the crystals? The alien's eyes widened as he understood what she was suggesting. It could cause a cascade reaction. The entire formation could discharge at once. Would that hurt the wolves? It would hurt everything in a large radius, he said, including us. Sarah looked back at the pack closing in from all sides, then at her environmental suit's power unit. It was designed to provide emergency power for mining equipment, which meant it could deliver a significant electrical charge if properly connected. How? Larger radius are we talking about? Kale studied the crystal formations around them, his enhanced senses picking up details she couldn't detect, perhaps half a kilometer. But the discharge would be enormous. It could kill us as easily as them. Or it could scare them off, Sarah said, already working to remove the power unit from her suit. And if we're going to die anyway, we might as well make it count. She could see the doubt in Kale's yellow eyes, but also something else. Respect. He had called her hot when he first met her, but now she could see that he was beginning to understand that human attractiveness wasn't just physical. It was about courage, ingenuity, and the willingness to take impossible risks for the right reasons. Tell me how to do it, he said simply. Sarah smiled and began to explain her plan. They had one shot at survival, and it was going to take both human engineering and alien knowledge to pull it off. The crystal wolves were closing in from all sides now, their pack's tactics driving Sarah and Kale toward what they assumed was certain death. But they had underestimated both human ingenuity and the bond that was already forming between two very different species. As the first Volf leaped toward them, Sarah activated her improvised device, and the entire crystal formation erupted. A blaze of light and sound that could be seen from orbit. Asterisk. The explosion of light and energy that erupted from the crystal formation was like nothing Sarah had ever witnessed. The entire landscape lit up in a cascade of blue-white lightning that danced between the towering spires of living stone, creating a web of power that stretched to the horizon. The sound was beyond description. Part thunder, part singing crystal, part primal scream of a planet awakening. Sarah felt the discharge wash over her environmental suit like a wave of pure electricity, every nerve ending tingling as the energy passed through her. Her suit systems flickered and sparked, but held, the industrial-grade protection doing its job. Even as her emergency power unit was completely consumed by the feedback loop she had, the crystal wolves caught in the discharge weren't so fortunate. The creature's crystalline fur, which had seemed like natural armor, turned out to be a fatal weakness when exposed to the resonance frequencies of the planetary network. Sarah watched in fascination and horror as the pack scattered, howling, in pain as their bodies conducted energy they couldn't handle. Most fled immediately, but several of the larger wolves simply collapsed, their nervous systems overloaded by the electromagnetic pulse. When the light finally faded and the thunder died away, an eerie silence settled over the alien landscape. The crystal formations around them had dimmed to a faint glow, their energy temporarily exhausted by the massive discharge. Sarah's ears were ringing, and her suit's diagnostics were showing damage to several systems, but they were alive. That was... Kale began, then stopped, apparently lacking words in either his language or hers to describe what they had just experienced. Insane? Sarah suggested, checking her suit's power levels with growing concern. The overload had drained her backup batteries, leaving her with maybe 2 hours of life support. Brilliant? Completely suicidal? Effective, Kale said, with what might have been admiration. I have never seen anyone weaponize a planetary energy network before. Sarah laughed, a sound that bordered on hysteria. I've never been in a situation where I needed to. But that's the thing about humans. We're really good at improvising when our lives depend on it. She looked around at the dimmed crystal formations, her engineering mind already working on their next problem. The energy discharge had bought them time, but it hadn't solved their fundamental issues. They were still stranded on a hostile planet with limited supplies and no way to contact rescue services. The caves you mentioned, she said to Kale, are they still safe with the crystals powered down? Safer than before, he replied, moving toward the cluster of openings they had been trying to reach when the pack attacked. The resonance frequencies that kept the wolves away are gone, but the discharge will have frightened them. They will not return for some time. They made their way through the maze of crystal spires toward the caves, both of them moving more carefully now. Sarah's suit was damaged, and Kale's injuries from his long imprisonment were clearly bothering him more than he wanted to admit. But they were alive, and that was something. The cave Kale led them to was larger than Sarah had expected, with a main chamber that opened into several smaller alcoves. The walls were smooth stone, shot through with veins of the same crystalline material that dominated the landscape outside. But here the formations were smaller, more delicate. They gave off just enough light to see by, casting everything in a soft, ethereal glow. This will provide shelter, Kale said, settling against one wall with obvious relief. The cave systems go deep. They will protect us from the electromagnetic storms. Sarah found a relatively flat area and began to unpack her remaining supplies. Food, water, basic medical supplies, and her emergency communication unit, which was showing no signs of life after the energy discharge. She tried rebooting it several times before admitting defeat. My communicator is fried, she told Kale. What about yours? He showed her a device that looked like it had been crafted from metal and crystal, far more elegant than her utilitarian human technology. But when he activated it, nothing happened. The containment field damaged most of my equipment, he explained. This cave has natural shielding properties. Our signals would not reach orbit even if our communicators were functional. Sarah nodded, having expected as much. So we're on our own until someone comes looking for us. My employer will notice when I don't make my scheduled delivery, but that could be several days. My people will search for me as well, Kale said, but they will look in the wrong areas. I was exploring beyond our normal patrol routes when the storm brought down my ship. They sat in companionable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Sarah found herself studying her unlikely companion, trying to understand the creature who had bitten her arm and declared her hot within minutes of meeting her. Kale was clearly intelligent, possibly more so than many humans she had known. His English was remarkable, better than some native speakers she had encountered. But there was something wild about him, too. Something that reminded her that despite his ability to communicate, he was definitely not human. How did you learn to speak English so well? She asked finally. Kale's ears perked up at the question. My people are natural linguists. We learn languages by exposure to them. The more time we spend around speakers, the better we understand both the words and the underlying concepts. I have been studying human transmissions for several years. Studying us? Why? Because humans are ... interesting. He seemed to be choosing his words carefully. Most species we encounter are predictable. They follow patterns, stick to established behaviors. But humans do things that make no sense from a survival standpoint, yet somehow, you not only survive but prosper. Sarah laughed, like overloading a planetary energy network to scare off predators. Exactly like that, Kale said seriously. No rational being would attempt such a thing. The risk of death was enormous, the chance of success minimal. Yet you did it anyway, and it worked. Sometimes the irrational choice is the only one that makes sense, Sarah said. My mentor used to say that the universe doesn't care about our plans, so we might as well make them as crazy as possible. Your mentor sounds wise. He was, Dr. Marcus Webb. He taught me everything I know about engineering, about survival, about thinking outside the box. Sarah felt a familiar pang of loss. Webb had died in a mining accident 2 years ago, leaving her his ship and his roots, but also his debts and his impossible standards. He would have loved this situation. Stranded on an alien planet with a talking Wolfman and a pack of crystal. Predators, he would have called it Tuesday. Kale tilted his head in a gesture that was surprisingly dog-like. Wolfman? Sorry, Sarah said, realizing she might have been inadvertently insulting. It's just, you look like wolves from Earth. Four-legged predators with fur and fangs. Except you walk upright and can talk. Ah, your people have pack hunters. As well, we did long ago. Most of them are domesticated now, kept as companions rather than wild animals. We call them dogs. Kale's expression shifted to something like amusement. So you see me as a large domestic animal? Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. No, I mean, it's just the physical resemblance. You're obviously intelligent and civilized. And ... double quotes she trailed off, realizing she was babbling. And I bit you, Kale said softly, which probably reinforced the impression that I am more animal than person. Look, Sarah said, turning to face him fully. I'll admit that was shocking. Where I come from, biting someone is something animals do, not people. But I'm starting to understand that your customs are different from ours. Very different, Kale agreed. Among the Lycanthi, physical contact is rare and precious. We are not casual with touch the way humans appear to be. A bite, especially the kind I gave you, is ... intimate. It carries meaning. What kind of meaning? Kale was quiet for a long moment, and Sarah could see him struggling with how to explain something that was probably fundamental to his culture, but alien to hers. When one of my people bites another in the way I bit you, he said finally, it is a declaration of interest in forming a pact bond. Not just attraction, though that is part of it. It is saying, I see you as worthy of trust, of partnership, of love. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. Love? The concept does not translate. Perfectly, Kale admitted. But yes, among my people, such a bite is often the first step toward what you might call marriage. Marriage. Sarah stared at him, not sure whether to laugh or run. You proposed to me? During a rescue operation? While I was still wearing an environmental suit? I did not propose exactly, Gale said, and if she didn't know better, Sarah would have sworn he was blushing under all that fur. I declared my interest in the possibility of eventually proposing, assuming you were receptive to the idea. And we survived long enough to get to know each other properly. Sarah couldn't help it. She started laughing. Not the hysterical laughter from earlier, but genuine amusement at the absurdity of the situation. Here she was, stranded on an alien planet with a humanoid Volf who had essentially asked her out. On a date by biting her arm? I'm sorry, she said when she could speak again. It's just ... This is possibly the strangest meet cute in the history of the galaxy. Meet cute.